Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask that you like us, leave comments, maybe subscribe, and even support us on Patreon. All of that helps keep us on the air. Today's guest, I'm really excited to have with us. And before I get into his book and our discussion, I just wanted to mention that this is the third in our series of 7 interviews that are meant to provide you with tools to work through these times of chaos, to help you get your peace, to maintain your peace while there's chaos all around us, because it seems to be increasing, not on a daily basis, but almost hour by hour. So we're here to help you deal with all of that. So today's guest is Kris Land. He's an award-winning conscious entrepreneur and spiritual teacher whose work explores awakening through fear, remembrance, and inner truth. He's the author of Infinity Within, and you see that book here on YouTube. It's a genre-defying book that blends spiritual insight, emotional honesty, and mythic storytelling. And that's quite a combination, but I'll tell you, it's a great read. Alongside his creative work, Kris is a veteran CEO and serial entrepreneur who has founded 12 high-tech companies, achieving 11 successful exits and 1 IPO. His decades of real-world leadership bring grounded depth to conversations about healing, purpose, and conscious creation. He's also the founder of Amazing Items for You Publishing and Campaign Catalyst Marketing. He's also a husband and father of 3 boys. So, Kris, I'm going to turn the mic over to you to talk about your spiritual journey from childhood until now, and then we'll get into your book.
Okay, well, first off, I want to say thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast and to have this discussion. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Do you want me to just dive in with the start, or how do you want me to start?
Well, I'd like you to start from the beginning, which is childhood and how you were raised in terms of religion and spirituality with your parents and where you grew up and how that's evolved to become the spiritually conscious person you are today.
I will try to keep that relatively short. So I grew up in North Dakota, actually in North Dakota and Golden, Colorado. My dad was both a wildcatter as well as a rancher. Um, I was very much what would be considered a computer geek and an introvert as a child. I started selling Apple II computers when I was in junior high, so that ages me a bit.
Wow.
And during that time, I learned how to self program and had done some pretty fun stuff. And this guy that bought one of the Apple IIs from me was a third generation farming family that owned tens of thousands of acres and wanted to use the computer to do accounting. So I knew how to program, and he knew what accounting looked like. And so what ended up happening is he would tell me what to write, and I wrote it. And we ended up doing that. And then about a year and a half later, getting purchased. The whole company got bought. So at the age of 17, I sold my first company. And about 6 months later, went into a deep depression. So if you've heard of stories how people win the lottery and destroy their lives, I at
Yeah.
least have a view of how that looks from my point of view. And that is, at that point in time, at the age of 17, after accomplishing pretty much everything I was told in the material world I was supposed to do, I was left with the sense of now what? I I didn't have any goals. I didn't have anything. And so, in answer to your question of my background from spirituality, my folks were United Methodists, and I did go to church, and I even taught Sunday school with my mom. Um, but I was always very curious about all theologies, and so I, as a child, studied many different theologies, going all the way back to Egyptian, Sanskrit, Gnostic, Buddhism, Christianity, Catholicism, and many others. Um, and at a fairly young age, really felt that even though the semantics in all of the different religions was very different, that the result results were all very similar. So
Mhm.
anyway, when I got into that depressive state, it took me a few months to figure out. The first step was to come up with some goals that I would never fully accomplish, but I could on a daily basis do and give me kind of a stepping stone or starting stone of re putting back together what was important to me. So the three goals I put together was to have fun, to learn, and do neither at the harm or impedance of others. And so on a daily basis, obviously you can go have fun and you can learn. And then not harming other people is pretty critical too, in my estimate. And so with those three goals, that allowed me to kind of get out of that depressive state. And then I got hired at a bank in San Diego, and my boss, his name was Chris as well. Um, in one of our discussions, like fairly soon to being hiring, he told me he was an atheist. And even though I have no issue with anybody believing anything they want to believe, it didn't sit right for me for him. And so I kind of thought about that, and kind of from a scientific point of view came up with four questions that when asked show that all the benefit is in believing we have a soul and all the downside is in believing we don't, regardless of whether we do or don't. So I
Yeah.
wasn't able to prove to him he has a soul, but I could show him that all the benefit is in believing he has one. And
Yeah.
it changed his way of looking at things. But it also left me with a question, which is great. If we have a soul, what is it? What's it doing here? What's our purpose? And so through that thought process, I started, again, because of my background in technology and science, using the scientific method, started asking questions and trying to boil things down into the simplest truth I could, and came up with a construct which originally was going to be called the soul path or your soul path, and eventually 40 plus years later became the infinity within. Came up with a whole construct of how I think, or an idea of how things are running and what's going on. And those ideas came from three places. One is the question of, okay, we have a soul, what is it? The second is all the studying of theologies. And the third leg on that stool is that growing up from the age of 6 and beyond, and I think even before 6, I've had a number of out of body experiences. I've had some NDEs or near death experiences. One of them that easily could have been a death experience. And I've had a lot of other things that happened to me and around me that would be considered not normal and not real. And we're told that we made them up or ate the wrong food or whatever the reason is. And what
Mhm.
I found from those experiences is that maybe the things of those nature are more real than the reality we're told actually exists. And so after putting together the writings and putting together the general, well, actually the entire book, I was not an author at the time. So I hired a ghostwriter who then kept wanting to make it her own story. So I fired the ghostwriter and put all my notes in a filing cabinet. And then since then, founded 11 companies, took one public, as you'd mentioned. But all of the companies and all the experience over time, I did with the basis of the construct I wrote in my 19s and 20s, followed me through the whole process. So everything that's in the infinity within was still very present for me, even though the notes were in the filing cabinet. I had them. Then about 5 years ago, I really always wanted to do some authoring of books. And so I started writing my first book series, which was also my first book, was How to Build Your Dream Home. And after having a pretty large amount of success in selling that and getting a fairly strong response, I wrote another book called The Finance Book for Young Adults, which also did and has been doing really well. And my wife, who had a difficult child upbringing, always was asking me questions about reality and how I looked at things and why I was fairly positive. And so I shared with her the constructs that are in the book. And so at the beginning of 25, she looked at me and says, "You have to finish this book. With the world where it is, with the stuff that's going on, and with so many people operating in fear and feeling like they're alone, you need to finish this book." So the first 3 months of 25, I did nothing but work on taking my notes and getting the book completed, which got published in the middle of 25. And here we are today.
Okay. So you
How's
met,
that?
well, you made reference to some experience you had, experiences that were, in your words, not quite normal from the age
Not
of
not real.
not real, from the age of 6 and onward. So could you talk about those experiences a bit? I know that that's going to take us into the book, but uh,
That's okay. I mean, even what
they're
I've described takes
they're
us
they're
somewhat
very
into the book.
relevant, and they are part of your journey.
Absolutely. They're arguably one of the three legs that got me to write the book. So I'm going to start with a side story, and that is, how many times have you heard about kids that say they see ghosts or things that are not real?
Yeah, very frequent occurrence.
And what is the typical response of the parent when a child approaches them with this?
Well, that's your invisible friend, and it's nice that you have an invisible friend. But let's make some real friends.
So, what is that really doing? Well, let's take a look at from the parent's perspective first, and that is, they're actually trying to calm the child down and provide some safe place to be from their perspective by telling the child that they're imagining it, or it's an imaginary friend, or they had a bad dream, or they ate the wrong food, or whatever it is. Unfortunately, today's term for that is called gaslighting, because what was real for the child is real for the child. And what it may be doing, even though it's the parent is doing it from the best intention, is that maybe the child is actually more open to what's really going on and actually seeing things that are more real than what we're told. And then from childhood growing up, we're continually told that these not real things, or these things that are out of the ordinary, aren't real, really are real, and signposts that we should be listening to. And so the question comes down to, how they affected me. At 6 years old, which was one of the starting points of having an out of body experience, I was sitting on my carpet and it was late evening. And all of a sudden, I felt myself transition into a space of, I could see infinitely, I could hear infinite voices, and everything around me had the texture of tissue paper or non-existence. And so there was this toy train I went and picked up. It was this wooden train. It was fairly substantial, but when I picked it up, it felt like smoke. It had the feeling that it really was ethereal and didn't exist. Scared the crap out of me. I ran up to my folks and told them what happened. Of course, they told me that it was a bad dream. I went to sleep, and the next morning, I just, as a 6-year old, just kind of rubbed it off as, it's a bad dream, right? Then at 8 years old, it happened again. And I played with the experience a little bit more and did more listening. And found that I could focus in on conversations and focus in sight for infinite space almost. And again, after I started playing with it, it scared the crap out of me. I ran it to my folks. They told me the same thing. And again, I kind of forgot about it. At age 12 is where it got really interesting. And this is where the listeners are going to have to add a grain of salt or not. For me, it was very real because I was there. For the listeners, it's like, yeah, Kris might be hallucinating or whatever. What happened to me then is I went into an out of body experience. But as I mentioned, I started buying and selling things at a young age. So I made some money at a young age. And I bought at the time what was something that was pretty cool, which was a California King waterbed, which
Mm.
in those days was a big deal. Nowadays, you don't see them anywhere, right? So I had this Cal King waterbed. Now, for those folks that don't know what it is, it's a California king size mattress that's basically filled with water. So it's massive, it's heavy, and you don't move them once they're filled up. So I'm sitting with my back against it on the carpet, and I get into this out of body phase, and everything's kind of as I've explained. And I'm kind of listening and playing with things, and everything has that feeling of tissue paper, right? So I take my finger and I turn around and push on the waterbed, and it moves 3 inches, and the carpet line is clear. Scares the crap out of me. I ran up to my parents, right?
Yeah.
They tell me, of course, I imagine everything. The next morning, however, I go down, and the waterbed is no longer in the space it was in, and there's a mark on the carpet where it had been. So that was my first. This is not a dream. This is
Mhm.
actually happening. And what we're being told is going on is not the whole story. So then I'm going to jump forward. In North Dakota, you get to drive early because we're farmers and ranchers, and you get your driver's license early. So I got mine when I was 14. And my mom and dad gave me a Mach 2 Mustang when I was 15. And in the first month I got it, I had 6 accidents. Now, these accidents were kind of interesting. Now, in North Dakota, it snows and the roads are very icy and the winters are pretty cold. And so my first accident is I was going down this hill and kind of slowly slid into this motorhome that was parked along the street. I freaked out. It was my first accident. I ran up to the people's house. I rang the doorbell. I said, "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I ran into your RV." So they come out, they look at my car, they look at the RV. There's not a scratch on either of them. They said, "Why are you bothering us? There's no damage here at all." So that was my first one. The next four were pretty much the same. They were accidents, but not really. But for me, they were a big deal because they were my first ones, right? The sixth accident was this old lady in a full size Cadillac runs a stop sign and T bars my car on the passenger side and moves the door almost to the middle of the car. Neither of us got hurt at all. And my dad, for whatever reason, decided to have the car fixed. So the dealership was a few blocks down from Team Electronics, which is where I worked in selling computers. And I think it was 2 weeks to a month later, the car gets done. And the night I pick the car up, I'm driving home on Old Highway 10. And Old Highway 10 is like this little 2-lane highway. Highway is a bit loose word with these slope things, and there's ice and snow. And as a teenager, I'm driving way too fast on this road. And the road itself wasn't icy, but I'm still driving too fast. I'm doing 60, 70 miles an hour, right? But I have a problem. There's a black pickup truck that is swerving, coming at me from the opposite direction. It's a drunk driver. So I pull the Mustang just off enough off the road for him to just miss me by an inch or two. And he misses me, but now I have a brand new problem. The combination of the slope and the ice and the snow are now sucking the car down the slope towards the concrete pylon of a bridge. This is not good. All of a sudden, I feel this huge surge of energy, a bright flash of light, and the car goes 90 degrees across the road. I shear 6 trees off. The steering column is now stabbed through the seat I was sitting in, and I'm hanging upside down by my legs from the steering wheel. The engine is partially ripped out of the car, and the whole car is 3 feet off the ground. And I do not have a bruise or scratch anywhere on me. I then let my legs loose and crawl out underneath the car and go up and over the road where the car at 60, 70 miles an hour changed its direction by 90 degrees. And the only thing that showed that it changed degrees was about a half inch to 1 inch of snow. Explain to me how that happened. At that point in time, I knew two things. One of one of which was it's not my time to go. And number two is that the world is certainly not operating in the way we're told.
Okay. So those conclusions that you drew way back then, are they things that you acted upon afterwards, or was it just a feeling of I am protected by forces unknown, uh, but I'm going to enjoy that protection while I have it, or what was going forward in your mind and your perspective, your approach to life at that point?
Well, certainly knowing it's not my time to go was helpful because it shifted the way I looked at things. Um, as far as looking at it as I'm being protected, I'm not sure I really went there so much as I could be protected, or maybe I had something to do with it, and I just don't know how or why yet. I had some other things happen as well, which we could go into, but the bottom line is, remember, I went into the Deep Depression when I was 18. So this is 3 years after all this happened.
Mm,
So
true.
even though
Yeah.
these things happened to me and they stayed with me and they were very real to me, they didn't keep me from falling in depression and losing my path for a while. But it was after building the three simple goals of learning and having fun and not doing either the harm or repeats others, and then asking the question of, okay, if we have a soul, what is it here for? And then starting to really dive in deep into the questions of what that looks like, that it gave me a solid foundation going forward from that point of how I look at life and how life operates around me and for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So why don't we dive into this book that is so many years in the making? Uh, when you say that you were able to resurrect your notes from over a period of time, does that mean that you were keeping a journal? Was it a daily journal, or what were these writings? What were these notes that you eventually resurrected?
It was a little different. I actually, in my 19s and 20s, wrote the entire script in handwriting that I gave to the ghostwriter.
Okay.
So the whole construct and all the ideas for your soul path or the soul path, which eventually became the infinity within, actually I wrote when I was 19 and 20. When I say that they influenced me, the way that I look at what we're here for and the construct that we're in, we can dive into a little deeper, it influences my day-to-day looking at how things work and how I perceive things that happen around me. So if something bad happens, I don't really look at it as a bad thing, even though it in the middle of it doesn't feel real good. I look at it as a learning experience, and how is it serving me today and how does it serve me tomorrow? So I look at things in a slightly different way. I also have a different way of looking at coincidences. Many people look at coincidences as the word suggests, that some random event happened and it happened because it's totally random and there is no rhyme or reason. I have a sentence for that, and that is there are no such things as coinkydinks. They don't exist. Now, why do I say that? Since 15 ish, I started going to coffee places and restaurants and reading my book and spending my own time in my own space. I can be sitting pretty much anywhere. In fact, this happened a weekend ago when I took my boys and my wife to breakfast. I'll be sitting anywhere and minding my own business, and some random person will pull up a chair, not ask, pull up a chair, sit down, tell me their life story, tell me things that you never would tell a stranger or even your best friend, have a whole conversation, get up, and walk away. And I have this happen all the time. Now, initially, I looked at this as coincidences, just is weird stuff happening, right? But when I really started being curious about it and looking into it a little deeper, what I found is in every single case of this happening, the people that sat down and needed to hear something I had to say, and I needed to hear something they had to say. And so what I found is there are no such things as coinkydinks, that we're all interconnected beings, and that when we're having a conversation like this, we actually had an agreement before to go do this. And then we're just doing the thing at our avatar level in the game based on an agreement we made a while back. And the quinkadink is not a quinkadink. It's you and I having a conversation that we were supposed to have.
So here we are
So here we are.
having our conversation as planned.
And as agreed to.
Yeah. So the book itself has a structure that is unusual for most any book. And as I introduced you, we referenced it as mythic storytelling. So in looking at the structure, you made some decisions when you wrote this book initially that had to do with not writing a memoir, not writing something that would feel like a self-help book, for lack of a better word, but to tell us a story. And the way that you begin this book is really by summarizing it for us. Now, I appreciated that because when I'm presented with books such as yours for this podcast, I typically go to the last chapter and read that first because I want to know where it's going and if the journey's going to be worth getting to where it's going.
Yep.
With your book, I didn't have to read the last chapter because the last chapter's in the first chapter. and you not only summarize the book for me, but you give me a lot of hints in terms of an analysis of what's taking place. And I'm thinking, okay, what's this guy doing? Do I just need to read the the introduction and the first chapter and stop there? So, you know, talk to me about why you chose that kind of a structure. Uh, as you know, what was your thought process in presenting the reader with a lot of your conclusions or a lot of uh, what's going to take place, what they have in store for them.
So I'm hearing kind of two questions. I'm hearing about the question about how the introduction and why it was written the way it was written. And the other is how the book was written to be kind of a spiritual memoir without being a self-help book.
All right.
So those are the two questions I'm kind of hearing. So let's talk about the introduction first. I wrote the introduction with a kind of a sampling of where the journey of the book is going to take you, but I did it with four personas and I intentionally chose them. So the four people I discussed in the introduction, my mom actually got really kind of frustrated with me on the fourth one. And she said, "Why in the world did you include him in your book?" So the four people I talk about in the introduction is Jesus Christ, who has influenced a lot of mankind, the Buddha, who has also influenced a lot of mankind in a slightly different perspective, more from presence and silence versus healing and remembering who we are, which is what Jesus did. And those are two people from our far past. And then we
Mhm.
have two people that are from our present. And the third one I picked because he actually went through some extremely personal, strongly personal challenges in life. Went through some kind of really like personal self destruction type places. And he'll tell you that. Um, and he got out of it and then he wrote his books. And that's Eckhart Tolle or Eckhart Tolle. And he's written some phenomenal books like The New Earth and so on and
Mhm.
so forth. The fourth person that I had in the introduction is Elon Musk.
I'm
And
with
I
your
would bet
mother.
you
That
money,
gave me a jolt too.
and I would bet you money that if you and I sat down with Elon and said, "Are you a spiritual leader?" he would say, "No."
Right.
But I'm looking at these leaders, these spiritual leaders, from a slightly different viewpoint.
Mhm.
And that is that each one of them, including Elon, were able to take a look at fear and doubt and being told what's impossible and changing it. And if you look at what Elon's done, he started a car manufacturing company and was told he will fail. And not only will he fail, but he'll fail just as bad as DeLorean failed when he tried to do it. Elon not only didn't fail, it is arguably the largest car manufacturing company on the planet now. Then, almost simultaneously, he's told by multiple countries and by NASA and governments, you will never build reusable landable rockets. It's impossible. And within a few years, he's now made it commonplace. And then everybody has the you know what's to tell them it's impossible for anybody to run multiple multi-million dollar companies and make any of them succeed. Yeah, he's done that too. So here's a guy that went through according to his own talkings, gone through a pretty horrific childhood, getting beaten up all the time by other kids, a father that wasn't very nice. I mean, some pretty harmful things, as well as being told multiple times he will fail and never do the things he has dreamed to do, and yet turned around and did them. And the reason I bring this up is this is what all of us, when we take a look at fear and doubt, and shift it and look through the illusionary curtain of what's real and what's not, this is what's possible. And Elon is walking proof of what's possible when we look past fear and doubt and say, you know what, it's not impossible. I'm going to go do it. So that's why he's in the introduction.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Very much so. And it's,
Thank you.
as you take us through that explanation that you just gave, it makes all the sense in the world because we're
It's
constantly, as human beings, faced with you can't do that, or that's not possible, or just stick to what's normal and realistic. That's what's not realistic.
exactly.
And to come to an understanding that anything's possible and to be able to work from a framework of infinite possibilities is just mind-blowing if you can get yourself there.
It's the fear and the doubt. It's
Yeah.
kind of like for those people that watch The Matrix. The first movie, The Matrix, I thought is and was phenomenal because the red and blue pill represent the removing of doubt, the the passing through fear. And I remember when Neo goes to visit the Oracle and he's sitting there waiting and he sees this child bending this metal spoon and he says, "How are you doing that?" And the child says, "It's not so much about bending the spoon as understanding the spoon doesn't exist anyway."
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Right.
And so there's a lot of things in the matrix that are becoming more understandable by the human race in understanding and remembering what we really are and what we're capable of doing once we get past the fear and doubt.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm very curious about, uh, speaking of oracles, is the basis for Elias. And did you have in your experience someone that you felt really guided you, or is he based on the oracle? I mean, did you come up with that figure because you appreciated what you saw in that movie?
Well, we got to remember, I wrote this 40 plus years ago. The movie didn't exist. Even the
Oh, that's
concept of the
true.
movie
Yeah,
didn't
right.
exist. No,
Okay.
no, 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 no. So to answer your question is that I've had some phenomenal mentors in my life, but they're all business mentors, and I've had some really good ones, and some very well known names. Um, Elias in my book is more of when I was in my 19 and 20s. The best way I could describe writing the book and coming up with the construct and asking the questions
Mhm.
is that I was receiving a download, that I was actually connecting to what we are and downloading information. And that was my Elias, is me asking questions of myself and going into my own space and then getting downloads to write the content.
Okay, now we get into the realm of channeled information. And
Yeah.
is this experience of downloads something that you intentionally went to? You went into a meditative state and you had this experience, or it's an experience that startled you when it first happened, and then you decided to go with it and expanded on it?
I would say it was more of the softer approach. You remember the starting of this was a deep depression, and then climbing out of it, and then getting the questions around whether we have a soul, and then asking what is a soul, and then by being deeply curious, it's probably the best example of manifestation of how it works. Is I was working with this person later in life. I think it was probably in my 30s, maybe 40s. I was working with this group. And one of the people I was working with came up with this concept of when you're discussing something that's difficult, or something that's hard to articulate, think of it as one of those plate dispensers with the springs, and you have the plates on top and they're all
Right.
stacked and
Yeah.
pushing the spring down, right? So what you do with that is, if you're trying to articulate something that's difficult and trying to get a thought out, is to treat the plates as thoughts. And whatever thought is on the top, you need to take off and look at, take what you need out of it, and then go to the next plate, because you can't get to the lower plates until you take the plates off the top, right? And
Hmm.
so the process of the construct and the ideas and the thought processes and the things that go into the infinity within, the downloads kind of came to me in that plate type of analogy, where I'd ask some questions and some plates would pull up, and I'd look at the plates and I go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And okay, oh well, cool, I like that one. And just kept pulling the plates off for about a year and a half, until I had all my notes of how I think this construct works and what we're doing here and what's our purpose.
Interesting. Okay. That's a new one to me. But as I always tell my audience, take what resonates with you and discard the rest until you're ready to deal with it. That's
Exactly right.
that's pretty neat. Uh, okay, so I'm going to quote your book for a minute. This is on page 19. I'd been chasing answers for years by the time I met him, Gabe, short for Gabriel. So I interpreted that as you had been spending quite a bit of time, and as you said, trying to figure out what your soul was and your purpose was. Uh, so when you say, I met him, Gabe, is that to express that sense of finally being able to see who Kris Land is?
Kind of. So the sentence, so keep in mind, the book is kind of a non-fictional memoir built around a fictional character, as you said, Gabriel, who goes by Gabe, who, just as a side note, I intentionally chose that name as the Archangel Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
And that he met Elias at a coffee shop, in very much the way I have people come sit down.
Yeah.
And if you remember in chapter 2, the opening question. So Gabe sees Elias. Elias is ordering some coffee. Gabe knows this random person is going to come sit down. He does. And the opening question Elias asks Gabe is, do you believe you have a soul?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
That's quite an opening question for somebody you've never met before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about the sentence that you quoted, I'd been searching for answers until I met him. And you reflect back on what I said a few minutes ago about him, meaning Elias, the mentor for Gabe, represents the downloads I started getting, the plates coming off the plate dispenser. Really, what that's talking about is for the first 20 years, I've been doing lots of studies of theologies and trying to put together these weird things that were happening to me and these things that pointed to the fact that the universe does not operate the way we're told it does. It operates in a very different and more expansive way. And trying to understand all that, that for me, my Elias was starting to pull the plates off and starting to get these downloads and starting to putting them to paper. But Gabe, the reason the book is written the way the book is written is I didn't want anybody to feel like they had to believe me. In other words, if I made this a memoir of Kris Land, then everybody goes, oh, well, I either have to believe this guy or I don't, or it's not a real book, right? I don't want that pressure. I want people to be able to experience Gabriel as a fictional character going through his life, learning from Elias as this entity that asks questions. As a really good mentor, he doesn't tell Gabriel pretty much anything. He asks questions through the whole journey in order to get Gabe to go within and remember the answers that were already there inside of him, but they needed to be dug up a little bit. And so the whole book is designed to be kind of a mirror and an experiential mirror where, like you said, just 20 seconds ago, is you take out of it what resonates, what vibrates with you, what resonates with you. You take out of it what resonates from you, and the rest you just leave. And the best example I can give is when I read Eckhart Tolle's The New Earth the first time. I got some really cool stuff out of it, and I put it up on the bookshelf. 2 years later, I took it down and read it and went, I don't remember any of this stuff. This is all brand new stuff. But nobody went and grabbed the book and reprinted it on me. The book was in the bookcase. But I was ready to receive new information, even though the book had not changed at all.
Right.
And then I put it on the bookshelf, and 2 years later, I pick it up and read it. And it's like, holy crap, there's stuff I didn't even see in here. Well, that's what I'm hoping my book does, is that it allows people through a layered approach to remember what they're capable of doing, kind of like the Elon Musk story, right? That we're all these connected, co-creating entities, and that we agreed by the very rules of this game to forget what we are in order to make the game more challenging. And that was the whole there's a set of rules, and we can go through them a little bit, but the whole purpose is for our souls to experience emotions. And there's a whole construct around this that I've kind of put together as the story of Gabe learning and rediscovering what he is, and then allowing the reader to take from it what they want.
Yeah. So speaking of the rules, now that you brought them up, you have 8 rules that you outline, and then in the process of repetition to make sure we get it and what those 8 rules are, you repeat them from very different perspectives. And I noticed that you not only have the 8 rules, but then later on you get into 8 lessons on the power of belief. Now, when I saw 8 and 8, I thought about that whole concept of the power of 8. I don't know if you've run into that in your readings, but and just as a side note for the audience, at the end of this book, there's a bibliography of recommended readings that informed this book, but also your notes on why you think it's important. what you got out of, or a small summary or capsulization of why this book's important. So I found that very interesting because it's often you don't see an annotated bibliography that has a personal perspective to it. So I
Thank you.
appreciated that a lot. But getting back to the 8 rules and the 8 lessons, is there a reason why you stopped at 8? Why that was the number that you settled on? Because you could have gone on with many other rules, or you could have stopped sooner. Why 8?
There's two answers to that question. Number one is that's what got downloaded, that there's 8.
Okay.
The
All
other
right.
answer is if you take the number 8 and flip it on its side, what is it?
The infinity within. Okay. All right. I get it. So I know we're getting close time wise, but could you quickly, for the audience, go through the 8 rules?
I'll go through the first 4. The other 4 I want people to experience through Gabe, but the first
Okay.
4 have a particular calming effect for a lot of people. And that is, okay, so if we're souls and we take the, and again, what I'm saying, I'm not telling anybody you have to believe this. I'm just going to say it, and then you can take from it what resonates. What I got out of it was that if we're a soul and we're this omnipotent being that exists outside of space and time, what does it do? And I could only come up with 3 things. And that's create stuff, meaning planets, universes, whatever, destroy stuff, and play games. And then if you take those 3 and boil them down, well, creating and destroying is pretty self explanatory. We don't have to spend a lot of time on those, right? Game. Well, what makes up a game? And I could only come up with, again, 3 things that make up a game. You have playing pieces, you have turns, and you have rules. And with those 3 things, you can have a game. Great. If for description purposes, we are in the game of planet Earth, first off, what is it? Well, it's a 4th dimensional construct, meaning that the primary motivator is time. If you go to 3 dimensions below, time doesn't exist. 5 and above, time exists, but it's not the primary motivator. So in this thing that we're in, time is the primary motivator. So, what is the one thing? I could only come up with one thing that a soul, this omnipotent being, would find interesting inside of a 4th dimensional construct. Do you want to take a guess?
I'm not going to throw it out there.
Okay, let's see if this resonates. The one thing that I could come up with that a soul would find interesting in a 4th dimensional construct is the experience of emotions.
Okay.
However, in order to play a game, you have to have rules. So, how does that look? So, rule 1 would be that we agree that when we play, that we're going to put our godlike abilities to the side. Now, why is that? Well, that's very important because if you, Bob, and I sat down to play Monopoly and I grab all the money and all the properties, you're not going to find the game very fun and you're not going to play with me, right?
Right.
Okay. So we agree to put all of our godlike abilities to the side in order to play this game called the Planet Earth. Well, that kind of works, except that if my favorite dog runs across the street, gets run over by a car, and I don't like it, I draw on my power, I change the event because I didn't like it. So I can't very well truly experience emotion and experience if anytime something happens I don't like happens and I just change it. In comes rule number 2. Rule number 2 is we agree to forget that we have these abilities. Well, that works for the whole experience problem, but it creates a different problem, and that is it becomes an infinite loop trap. And I'm going to assume as a soul being that we're not going to enter into a game that has no way out forever. That's not a lot
Right.
of fun. So then in comes rule number 3, and that is we agree that we're going to have turns. And so what that looks like is that when we're at the pearly gates as a soul getting ready to enter the game of Earth, and we have these rules, rule number 3 is that we kind of decide overall how long we're going to play in the game and what we're going to accomplish and do and be in a rough way. We're not going to spell everything out because that's not any fun. If I go into playing Monopoly with you and say I've already pre-agreed that I get Park Place and Boardwalk in Pennsylvania and too bad, that's not really a fun game either, right? But I agree that I'm going to have turns, and then within these turns, meaning lifetimes, that there's certain things that I want to experience and accomplish and then move on. However, here's where it starts getting interesting. If I don't accomplish these things that I've set aside and agreed to, I get to do the turn over and over and over until I do. And then once I do, I get to move to the next turn and the next turn and eventually leave the game and I'm done playing. Okay. So now I've got the general idea. The fourth rule is, and I'm going to touch back on the third rule. The fourth rule is that we agree that when we're playing, we're going to be fully invested. Okay, so back to rule 3. There's a couple of little nuances, and then rules 5 through 8 cover some of this as well. Why? Let me ask you this question: do you play tic tac toe?
Well, I have, yes.
Do you play it now?
No.
Why?
Uh, Outgrown it. It,
Pretty boring game, right?
yeah,
I mean, once you figure out where the X's and O's go, you're kind of done, right?
yeah.
Okay. If you're this omnipresent being, are you going to play tic tac toe, or are you going to find a game like Go to go play?
Yeah, I want something serious
And hard and
difficult
complex,
and complex, right? Yeah,
difficult, and have a bunch of nuances and weird things to keep us from winning right away. Because what's the fun of winning a game right away if I want to really experience, right?
right.
So then we have, if you go to the Gnostics, they talk about the archons, and even the Bible talks about the archons, which I found fascinating because I didn't realize this initially until I started really doing research. The archons, by the Gnostic point of view, are the creators of reality. They're the gods that created the reality we're in. And in the Gnostic point of view, they've actually trapped us here and they feed on negative emotions. And so, even though they cannot directly affect us, they can do things that make us do things that are not nice and that are evil and create negative emotions so they can feed. I took a slightly softer approach in the Infinity Within, is that I think the archons probably exist, but if we are soul beings, we're probably smart enough not to enter a game where we're going to be trapped by other beings. However, we might have the concept of archons be in the game to muddy the water and to consistently and constantly put fear and doubt in the way of us. And then it's up to us what we do with it. And so now we have these complex turns where we've got this archonic influence that's constantly designed to drop fear in front of us. And fear is what helps create and enforce doubt. And doubt is what brings up the wall that keeps us from remembering and seeing what we are. And so back to the Matrix, where Neo, the whole key of what Neo experiences in the Matrix is the removal of doubt, right?
Right. Yeah.
Initially, a bullet hits him because he believes within the construct that a bullet can hit him and harm him. Eventually, he figures out the bullet is like the spoon, it doesn't exist. Therefore, it cannot hit me if I don't want it to. I would argue that doubt and fear in reality that we're playing actually works exactly the same way. And the more connected we are to what we are, and the more remembering we do, the more context we have for what Jesus, Buddha, and the rest of the spiritual teachers have not only shown us, but said, hey, you can do everything I've done. You just need to remember. And in the Bible, Jesus says very clearly to his disciples, you will do everything I have done and much more.
Mhm.
And the Bible says, you are all the children of God, and you will inherit the, the kingdom of heaven on earth, right?
Right.
Why does the book say these things? Well, as a child growing up as a United Methodist, I was taught that God and Jesus, and I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just saying from my perspective, I was taught that they should be put on a pedestal and to pray to them. When I started putting the notes together and really putting pen to paper, I asked a question of everybody, and that is it possible that maybe Jesus didn't want to be prayed to, but was really trying to say, hey, folks, we're the same, and you can do everything I can do once you remember? And it's just an interesting question that if you put that in perspective, when you re-go through the Bible as an example and read the chapters and verses from that perspective, it really makes quite a few of those chapter and verses, instead of becoming ethereal, to becoming very literal. And it's fascinating
Mhm.
the shift for me that happened when I read the Bible from that perspective.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just some things to be curious about.
Well, I think it's a marvelous way to suck us in because this game of life, and I think as with any game, the main purpose is fun, and that was going to be my answer to your question.
But fun is really just part of experience, right?
Yeah. And fun is you get a sense, it's an emotional response that, it brings you joy or happiness or whatever fun brings for you. Uh, but it makes it memorable. Uh, I know that one of my previous interviews was somebody who wrote a book called "The Game of Intuition," and she makes every learning experience a game because she says, if you're telling people, they don't want to hear it. But if you're giving them a fun way to approach it, and I would say your book is a fun way to approach this whole game of life, there is just so much you can learn. So I highly recommend it. My wife read most of it to me on a on a trip from Georgia to Pennsylvania, and we both enjoyed it together. Uh,
Yes.
I told her that she could volunteer to be a person who reads audiobooks, and she said, "No, I had enough. This is fine." But uh, so as we wrap up, I just want to give you the opportunity that I give all my guests, and that is to leave the audience with a few words of wisdom before we part company.
Before I do that, would you mind if I told you a story that really helped boost my ego?
Go for it.
So I finished the book in the middle of 25, and it got published, I think, in August, I think. Maybe it was a little bit before. And during the whole publishing process, I really wanted to find a narrator for the book that I felt would give the book a voice.
Okay.
And so I spent a fair amount of time researching, and I found a narrator who has read over 750 books. He's an award winning narrator, and he's done books for Eckhart Tolle, Dean Koontz, the Dalai Lama, and a number of other top authors in this
Hmm.
space. His name's Eduardo Bellini, and I'm probably butchering his name, so I apologize again, but I think that's right. And I got a hold of Eduardo and I asked him if he would please narrate my book. And the first thing he said is, I'm going to be a little expensive. And I said, I get that. And we can
Yeah.
work that out. The second thing he said was, I'm really busy and my schedule's pretty much packed. And so I may not be able to get to this until the middle of next year. I said, I get that too. I said, but your reading of the book, I think, is the right choice. So in Audible, the first 15 minutes the narrator needs to do in order to kind of finalize the agreement
Hmm.
and so that you can get the contract going. So Eduardo reads the 15 minutes and the next day gets a hold of me and says, Kris, I'm not putting the book down. I'm putting everything aside and I'm going to finish it this week. And so for me, that was huge to have somebody that has done the books he's done to say, I'm not putting your book down and I'm going to get it done. So that was just something. And the reason I bring that up is your comment about your wife reading and being
Yeah.
an Audible book narrator is that Eduardo has really done a phenomenal job of giving voice to the infinity within. So for those people that like listening to these kinds of books, he's phenomenal.
Okay. And where is the best place to get your book? I imagine on Amazon for sure.
So I've been blessed in that space. You can get my book on Audible, right? Apple, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Of all places, you can go to Walmart and get it. You can get it at many boutique bookstores. I've talked to a couple bookstores in Norway, Barcelona, Italy, Australia that are now selling the book. It's being sold worldwide right now in bookstores and online. If you put my name, Kris, Krisland or just Kris Land in Google or the Infinity Within, in the Google pages, I get the first 3 pages pretty much fully covered with my book and myself. So I've been very blessed that you can find me pretty much anywhere if you type in my name or the book cover. I do have the webpage, krisland.com. And then, of course, on Amazon or any of the other bookstores, if you just ask for The Infinity Within, they'll be able to order it or get it for you, or it might be on the shelves.
Okay. So let's get back to a few words of wisdom from Kris Land.
Probably the best wisdom answer I can give is that there are two kinds of fear in the world. There's the saber-toothed tiger on the hill chasing us type of fear, which is very visceral and very real, and you better run or you're going to get eaten. The other one, which is arguably just as disempowering, is the fear here. The fear here, however, if you use curiosity to dismantle it. So, an example of that would be I want to ask for a raise at my job, but I'm fearful I'm going to get fired, or I'm fearful they're going to laugh at me, or I'm fearful of whatever it is. That fear is now stopping you because of a doubt or doubts that exist and the fear that it puts in your mind, because it really is in your mind. Now, it could be real. In other words, you could ask for a raise and get fired. That's absolutely possible. But by asking the question, why am I fearful? Am I fearful of getting fired? Am I fearful of getting laughed at? Whatever it is, you've now opened up space to understand what the fear represents and is it serving you now? And then you can make a conscious choice instead of a subconscious choice of, is it okay if I ask to get a raise and I get fired? And if that happens, what do I do next? But being aware of that as a conscious choice versus stopping in your tracks and not moving forward and being stuck. And then as soon as you start being curious about the fear, why am I fearful of asking for a raise? You'll find underneath it, there's going to be some doubts. I doubt my ability. I doubt that I'm doing the right things. I doubt that I'm going to say it the right way. Whatever the doubts are, again, becoming curious and looking at them dissolves them and starts to bring you back to being present and being able to take control of your decisions instead of letting fear and doubt control you. So I think that's the strongest I can give you.
Okay. Great words. And audience, as always, take what resonates with you, incorporate it into your life, and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.